What is going on, full-time family? It is time for a video that I just felt like I had to make. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more stories like this that we are unaware of, but this is just one that I'm aware of, and it's one that I've been aware of for quite some time, and recently it's just really boiled to a head. And I've also came across some other pieces of information that just really kind of ticked me off about this story. And there's nothing that can really be done about UFC fighter pay, as far as just talking about it, or even anything in the foreseeable future, that can really get the UFC fighters what they deserve as far as their revenue splits with whenever the UFC signs a TV deal and stuff like that. And, in this video, I'll give you just brief reference points and comparisons to what I'm talking about. Um, before I really started watching the UFC, I was a fan of other sports, the NBA, the NFL, a little bit of MLB, and so you just in the media and just being a fan of those sports, you hear about where the pay comes from and stuff like that. Those athletes make millions of dollars, and it's almost insane the amount of money they make. They make so much money, people argue whether or not they deserve it. And it's not about what they do to make the money. It's not about the fact that they play a game. It's about the fact that they're the ones that bring in the money. Though every professional sport essentially is a star-driven league. If you don't have athletes that people care about, that elicit some sort of emotion, love or hate, people aren't going to care to come to your games. People aren't going to care to buy your tickets. People aren't going to care to spend money on your brand and on your product. And you're not going to make these millions of dollars. And so what the other sports were able to do was form, unions, player unions, and those unions gave them bargaining room against the owners and the people that were making all the money off of the players in the beginning. And it took a while for these players to get their unions together, and it ultimately happened. And now what happens is, clearly we're not going to have every single detail of all the, protections the play, these other sports protect their players with. But one of the things I do know is just one of the brief things that I want to touch on, and that's their revenue shares. Let's say the NBA does a deal with ESPN and a deal with TNT. Well, the players get 50% of that money. Let's say the deal is for $200 million. $100 million of that is shared amongst the players' salaries, and it's split. So it increases their pay, right? Right now in the UFC, that 50% is closer to 5%, and it could be lower than that. And so even if, the UFC, even if it had nothing to do with pay-per-view, right? Like, you can't expect all these guys to make millions of dollars off the pay-per-view sales. You don't have to pay these fighters with pay-per-view money. You can keep that for the big stars that you sell the pay-per-views. If you think Conor's selling all the pay-per-views, if you think the main event is the only fighter selling that card, and which is why only title fights and main events get pay-per-view points on pay-per-views, well then okay, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But all fighters, John Lineker level fighters, they could have a pay increase if they just got a percentage of the revenue sales. And I know it sounds, easy, and it's not. Or, because for one, obviously there's no fighters union, and for two, I don't know when there will ever be one, or if there will ever be one. And since that's the case, fighters are probably going to continue to go underpaid for the foreseeable future. And there's a lot of conversations this conversation could go so many different ways, because you could argue, and it's kind of a fucked up argument, but it's actually true. I mean, just because it's not a topic that is comfortable, it's a reality. If you pay people that fight in a cage millions of dollars, even entry-level fighters, there's no way they're going to have the same drive and the product's going to be diminished. People aren't going to be willing to go in there and fight for knockout bonuses, 50,000. You'd have to raise those. You'd have to raise a lot of things because people aren't going to be trying to go in there and fucking just entertain and, you know, get their heads beat in. Like, you know, they would be a lot more defensive. It would be a lot less entertaining, I think. There would be a few, you know, psychos out there, a few killers like Justin Gaethje and Cowboy and others that are just always going to go in there and throw down no matter what. But a lot of fighters, it would affect their motivation because this is the hardest sport in the world. There's never, in MMA, there's no days where you're training passing. In MMA, there's no easy days. You're training wrestling one day where you're getting slammed around. You're training jiu-jitsu one day where you're getting your fucking arms and neck and legs cranked. You're training boxing one day where you're getting punched in the face. Kickboxing one day where you're getting kicked in the face. There's no easy days. Not to mention the weight cuts. It's the hardest sport in the world. And so clearly if these fighters are not hungry, it's going to be a little harder to wake up every day. And that's just the hard reality. But that's not a case to not pay these guys and girls. And so that's a conversation that's going to be probably held over the next fucking 5 to 10 years. I don't, you know, yeah, are fighters underpaid? I do believe so. But, alright, that's just the beginning of this. I want to talk about John Lineker and what being underpaid means to a guy like John Lineker. And this is the thing. And when I say underpaid, I don't mean fucking he can't make a living. But the problem is, what happens when, okay, I make money to fight, but I can't book a fight? What if it's, okay, I'm fine with my pay. I signed a contract. I'm okay with this amount of money. I signed this contract for X amount of dollars. I'm okay with that. I signed the contract. But what happens when you guys aren't giving me a fight? When people are turning down fights with me? When I want to fight 3 times, 4 times a year? And I can only get 2 fights a year. I need money. I can't go fight anywhere else. This is what I do. So in the case of John Lineker, he's got to go in and Jessica Andrade, we heard her stories. Another Brazilian fighter, coincidentally, who was selling, you know, fight kits and cookies and shit to try and make a living before she ultimately got her title shot and became champion, and now those days are over. John Lineker hasn't got his title shot. And it's not because he's not good enough. It's actually, we're going to get into it. This is where we get into the plight of John Lineker. The reason he hasn't got his title shot, for one, TJ Dillashaw beat him. John Lineker, let's look at his profile. Let's look at his winning streak he was on when he fought TJ Dillashaw. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He was on a 6-fight winning streak. 1, 2, 3, 4. 10-1 in his last 11 fights. He had won 10 of 11 fights. Only 1 decision loss, and he was on it. Aside from that, he won 10 fights before he fought TJ Dillashaw. Split decision with John Dodson. Got his hand raised. 10th fight. Fights TJ Dillashaw, loses. If he would have beat TJ Dillashaw, he would have got to fight for that life-changing opportunity that is a title fight. Even if you don't win the belt, you make a nice chunk of change when you fight for the title. And if you do win the belt, you get to make that chunk of change more than once. And that's when you don't have to worry about selling fight kits, or in John Lineker's case, he's working at a pet store right now, an exotic pet store. And that's what's got him wanting a release from the UFC. One of the best bantamweights in the world wants released from the UFC because he can't get fights, and now he's forced to work at an exotic pet store, and he's fucking miserable. And if you look at his record and what he's done in the UFC, the amount of fights this man has in the UFC, the wins he has in the UFC, the guys he's fought, He's got 40 professional fights. He's been on win streaks in the UFC. And this man is begging for a release because he can't make ends meet, so he has to work at an exotic pet store. He's paid this many dues and put in this much work. And so let's get into it, because that's just the beginning. John Lineker wants his release. He's working at a pet store, and he's paid his dues. So he should be getting these opportunities. He's also an exciting fighter. His nickname is Hands of Stone. He knocks dudes out. He brings the pain. It got to the point a year ago, he said, I'm willing to go up a division or two to fight for any fight. Should I change my name to Hands of Pillow? Will that help? He said he'll change his name from Hands of Stone to Hands of Pillow. If my nickname is scaring these guys, what can I do to get a fight? He started questioning, did I piss somebody off? He's saying he can't survive like this. And so, just to the cherry on top of the plight of John Lineker and what he's, been going through over the last couple of years as a contender, only 29 years old with 40 professional fights. I mean, unheard of. Just coming off a split decision loss to Corey Sandhagen. So you've been through this fucking plight already, and then you lose because to the judges. Not because you lost a fight, but because the fucking judges who don't even know MMA raised the hand of the other guy who hasn't paid half the dues as you. John Lineker has paid his dues. He's put in the work. He has deserved a title shot for a long time. If you gave John Lineker a title shot after his left fight, nobody would have questioned it. You know why? Because he's fucking got 15 wins in this division. And because one of his only losses in the division was to TJ Dillashaw. And that's where we get to the cherry on the top. Because TJ Dillashaw tested positive for EPO in his Cejudo fight. Jeff Novinsky and the UFC and TJ, they've came out and they've stressed the fact, but it was only the Cejudo fight. I want any of them to explain, or even Cody Garbrandt, if it was only the Cejudo fight, how did Cody Garbrandt specifically call out EPO as the steroid TJ Dillashaw, or as the performance-enhancing drug TJ Dillashaw was cheating with? Way back in April of 2018. This was before Garbrandt fought Dillashaw. He called him out for being on EPO. So how was he only on it for the Cejudo fight? Maybe their EPO testing sucked or something, or maybe the EPO was out of the after test sample, or whatever happened. I don't get it, but if you go off the timeline and the evidence of Cody Garbrandt accusing TJ Dillashaw of being on EPO a year ago, a year before the Cejudo fight, then it would make you question if he hasn't been on EPO for a longer time. I mean, it seems like he has been. And just to elaborate on that for a second, whenever Cody Garbrandt accused TJ Dillashaw of being on EPO, this was after, clearly, the breakup. This was way after they were teammates. Cody Garbrandt said that TJ Dillashaw tried to show Team Alpha Male how to use steroids. And so if that's the case, what was he trying to show Team Alpha Male? Was it EPO back then? Has it been for this long of a time? It's a very real possibility if you just think about the timeline, because how would Cody Garbrandt know what steroid or PED TJ Dillashaw is on after the breakup? He's not in TJ Dillashaw's camp anymore. How would he know it's EPO? Let's say TJ Dillashaw was using clomiphene. That's what he was trying to show Team Alpha Male. Well, then how would Cody Garbrandt know that the new drug is EPO? Unless TJ has been on EPO for a really long time and Cody Garbrandt was calling him on his shit. And with that being the case, if that is the case, which there's a very good reason to believe TJ Dillashaw was on EPO longer than the Cejudo fight, even though that's not what he's trying to say. Cody Garbrandt would beg to differ. And so with all that being said, John Lineker was 10 wins out of 11 fights. TJ Dillashaw stopped him from life-changing money. Not only did he beat him in that fight, he broke his jaw. You know how fucking shitty it is if TJ Dillashaw was on EPO whenever he broke John Lineker's jaw and denied his title fight by beating him? He would have literally cheated John Lineker out of a broken jaw, and he also cheated him out of a fucking title shot, which would have changed his life. You set his career back for about a year because he didn't fight for 10 months after that broken jaw, and you potentially costed him millions of dollars in a title fight. And so if that's the case, man, the plight of John Lineker is real. And that's all I got to say in this video, you guys, man. That there's just so much going on with John Lineker here. I had to get that shit off my chest, because, I'm sure there's other stories going on with guys and gals that we don't know about, but this is just one that I've just had my eye on, and there's just even more detail. So let me know what you guys think about this shit in the comments, man. It is what it is. I'm out.